rock-hewn churches, Tigray province, Ethiopia. This is Nick Burt. I'm going to take you straight to a visit of a rock-hewn church in Tigray. So Tigray is a northern province of Ethiopia. So it borders with Sudan and Eritrea. So I'm going to start just by going straight to a church, then I'm going to come back and explain what took me there and a bit of Ethiopian ancient history, and then we'll look at a few more churches. So we arrived at the bottom of this cliff. I arrived with my wife and our guide, Goosh, and a driver in a minivan early in the morning. And our guides told us we were going to climb to the top of this mountain where we'd find a rock-hewn church. So this is December 2017. So we start ascending this natural stairway in the cliff. You can see on the left, it starts quite grassy, a lot of vegetation, quite big rocks. And then in the middle, it becomes a bit more of just a cleft in the rock. And then finally on the right becomes just a crack in the rock. So this is sort of continuing up the stairway, ascending up the mountain. When we reach the top of the mountain, there's a plateau. So walk across this grassy plateau, and then we enter the Ethiopian Orthodox Church area, which is demarcated by this wall. So we go through a small gate. This is considered a sacred space, and I noticed that our guide stopped and kissed the gatepost as we went through. There is a rock-hewn church in the center of the picture here. So you can just about make out a building, and just behind that building there's a rock-hewn church, but we didn't go to that one. We carried on along a path that took us to the edge of the cliff, and our guide just said, follow me, we're going around the corner here. So here we are heading off onto a 1 meter wide path on a cliff that must be over 100 meters above the plateau below. It was quite a rush to sort of a rush inside, a rush in feelings to sort of enter onto this path. Quite scary. We made sure we kept well to the wall side of the path and watched where we put our feet. Didn't want to trip up on this path. I tried to just focus on the path. I'm not very good with heights. I didn't want to look down into the valley, so I was just focusing on the path. So we travel about 30 or 50 meters along this path, and then we come to a doorway, which you can see on the left there. We take off our shoes because we're entering a sacred space, and we go through past a small wooden door in the cliff and enter into the rock-hewn church. So in the middle there, my eyes are starting to accustom to the darkness inside. I'm making out the shape of the doorway from the inside, the rock-hewn part. And then immediately behind me, I turn around and see the priest sitting in this little alcove. So as I get a sense of the space, I see it's kind of like a cube with a domed roof, and it's carved out with columns, like I say, a dome, and then all around the walls it has these paintings, this kind of Byzantine style painting. Christianity came to Ethiopia in the 4th century, and these rock churches are thought to have been started somewhere around the 8th century. So on the walls we've got images of these saints. Some of them are knightly saints. Saint George is the patron saint of Ethiopia, and above each of the saints is the name written in Ge'ez, which is the classic Ethiopian text, Semitic language, which is just used for church writings. It's no longer a living language in the sense that it's not spoken, but it's used for all the writings of the church. So up on the ceiling, you have images of angels. This is on the dome above our heads. and then kind of reluctantly have to get ready to leave. It's very pleasant inside this rock-hewn church. It's cool, it's calm, it's intriguing, and I must admit I've got a bit of a fear of going back onto that ledge. So what am I doing here in this extraordinary ancient rock-hewn church on the edge of Africa? Well, I came to visit my mother who lives in Uganda, um, and on the way we realized we would have to stop off in Ethiopia. And I have an interest in archaeology. I'm involved in some archaeology in the Holy Land, Bethsaida excavations, where I help out with some drawings. And there's no ancient history in Uganda, so I thought, well, I'll have a look and see if there's anything en route in Ethiopia that I can go and have a look at. And found out there was quite a lot of amazing ancient history in Ethiopia. So I contacted some archaeologists who were working on a site in Ethiopia and arranged to visit an archaeological site in Shire in Tigray. And it was from there that we managed to get into we managed to find a guide who would take us to the rock-hewn churches around Tigray. So this is in Shire, quite an amazing town up on the western side of Tigray province. So it's a town that has a road that runs east to west, but also a junction heading off to the north, going up towards Sudan. So there's a lot of trucks coming down from there, but also some camel trains. Surprising to see tuk-tuks in the town. They were used as like taxis, and cobbled streets surprised us, and a mixture of mosques and churches. And interesting on the churches, it was quite a new church, but it was painted with these very vivid images, which you can see in the bottom right corner. And I was particularly interested in the resurrection of Christ, and seeing the angel removing the stone from the grave. And look at that stone; it's a long, thin stone. It's like a stele, and we'll see where that concept comes from in a moment. So the archaeological dig was uncovering a town just outside Shire. So there was some gold mining happening, some informal gold mining along a stream bed, and the gold miners were discovering these foundations of buildings. It turns out there's a whole sort of town laid out under this village in Tigray. And this ancient civilization used to run from Ethiopia across the Red Sea and into Yemen, and then sort of connected up across Saudi, Jordan, and into the Holy Land area. And so it was all kind of developed in ancient times. So from maybe 10 BC, possibly even earlier. Sorry, 10th century BC, possibly earlier, and then right through first century. And of course the Ethiopian civilization continues even to this day. So there's that continuity of history they have. So we moved out of Tigray and went to Axum. And Axum is an incredible place. It's the center of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. But it also has these stele fields, which were stone monoliths set up in the 3rd and 4th century. And they're royal burial sites. So they mark the burial sites of royalty. Some of the biggest single monolithic stone structures ever attempted to be erected by man were installed on this site. You can see the biggest one actually fell, and you can see it broken there, which kind of takes us back to the image we saw of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, painted on that church. Looks like an angel's pushed that one over. So yeah, just this quite an amazing amount of history in northern Ethiopia. We were taken to a site which we were told was the Queen of Sheba's palace. And of course, the Queen of Sheba from the biblical story, she went to see Solomon to learn and to witness his wisdom. Um, and this is allegedly her palace. Uh, Not sure about whether the archaeology really fits, because the stonework, the foundations are very similar to the buildings from the 7th century AD. However, why couldn't this have been a palace of the Queen of Sheba? You know, there's no reason why it couldn't have been renovated and updated, and the building that we're seeing now could well have been one that was kind of reconstructed or built on top of the palace from before. So, yeah, if it was the Queen of Sheba's palace, we would be looking at a 10th century BC structure. So the Ethiopians have an extra story to the biblical story. They say that the Queen of Sheba came back pregnant, and when she gave birth to Menelik, her son, and when he was a young man, she sent him back to see King Solomon, his father. So he goes back, learns about the living God and the faith of Solomon. And Solomon decides he wants to send some priests back with Menelik as he returns to Ethiopia to teach the people. The priests obviously were very happy with their new temple in Jerusalem and were rather reluctant to go. And so the story goes that they took the Ark of Zion, the Ark of the Covenant, with them to make sure that they would be called back. But it seems they never were called back. Perhaps the temple was good enough and that the Ark was no longer needed. Anyway, so this is the claim that Ethiopia has the Ark of Zion. In Axum itself, this is the old Cathedral of St. Mary of Zion, and this is where the Ark used to be kept. Well, in fact, it used to be kept in that little building on the right. There's now an air-conditioned modern building which is used to house the Ark, and so these buildings are redundant. There's also a new concrete cathedral, which is much more suitable for worship and for gatherings, because this church is incredibly small inside. I got the opportunity to go in and had a look at some of the frescoes painted inside. So they pull the curtains back, and on one side, there were two frescoes of Mary, St. Mary. On one side, we have on the left side was the Greek version, which had a white Mary, and then on the right side, they had the Ethiopian version, the Black Mary. And that's the one I'm being photographed in front of. So interesting to see. So some more history. We started to go and look around Tigray at the rock-hewn churches. One of the first ones we came across was this rather unusual church. And it's unusual because it's actually carved into the rock face with three pillars, three very large pillars. And it's considered to be probably pre-Christian. So what type of temple this was before it was a church is unsure. Could it have been a pagan temple? Could it have been perhaps a temple that for the Jewish faith? Who knows? Just an interesting thought. On the bottom left, you can see the entryway into the compound area of this rock church. So, as with the previous rock church we saw, they are divided off from the land around by a wall with a formal entryway. And inside, we see stone columns, stone beams, all carved out of the rock. So quite extraordinary. From the outside, it just looks like a cave with carved columns. But you go inside, and it's almost like it's been constructed with these beams and columns, but they're just hewn out of the rock. It's all solid rock, and these beams and columns kind of simulate the carvings that are seen in some very ancient wooden structures of churches. So here's another rock-hewn church we went to. So both these churches, the one before and this one, are now fairly easily accessed by road. Um, this one has vivid wall paintings on its wooden entry. So it has a kind of a wooden entry in front of the stone rock-hewn church, and that's because it has been damaged. So damage could occur, I was told by the guide, either through earthquakes or through military action over the centuries. Sometimes Tigray would be attacked, and as part of the conquering process, they would try and destroy parts of the culture, and so some of the churches had been damaged. So you can see, again, on the right-hand side, we've got carved beams and columns. So this is all carved out of the solid rock, and even patterns engraved onto the arched ceiling, which is all carved out of the solid rock. Quite an amazing construction technique. Such a lot of work, but incredibly precise as well. You know, everything's kind of straight and aligned, and meticulous work to sort of make it look like wooden beams and columns. Very incredible. So the paintings are also beautiful, vivid. On the left-hand side, there's some gospel stories. You can see Mary there, St. Mary. We can see a crucifixion scene and the burial of Jesus. On the right-hand side, we can see saints, kings and queens. More paintings above the door. So the ones above the door, this is painted on a wooden panel. We can see the angels at the very top of the page, which are represented by a face and then wings. Below that, we see three figures seated together. And I was told this was a way in which the Trinity was represented in Ethiopian art. So that was an interesting idea. And then below that, we've got more saints pictures, the knightly saints, like St. George. Interesting to have a look at the horse furniture on these. It looks quite medieval style, sort of, well, 13th, 14th, 15th century style horse furniture. You know, the saddles and bridles and the leatherwork. So those sort of things can date the paintings. And even if they've been sort of touched up and redone over the years, you know, that sort of perhaps gives you a starting point for these particular paintings. Okay, back to the rock-hewn churches that are distant from habitation. So coming back to the ones that you actually had to sort of make an ascending pilgrimage to. So these are off the road, and it was usually quite a hard work to get up to them. You know, it wasn't easy. You'd climb a mountain, and you'd be coming up through a natural stairway, a cleft in the rock, which you can see on the left there, and then you'd come to a plateau. Interesting, this time we came to the plateau and we sat down and rested, and then there was suddenly a wind squall, and the scouts we were with, because you always have to have a scout with you who is employed from the local community, and the priest from the church was also with us. And they suddenly started an animated conversation, and I asked the guide what that was about, and they said, "Oh, they felt like it was an omen, a sign, the sudden wind squall, and they were worried about things in Tigray and saying, you know, they felt like there was war, there was trouble coming, and this kind of they felt it was an omen, almost confirming that." And I thought that was interesting. You know, it's obviously, you know, it felt almost like a pilgrimage ascending to this church, and I think it is similar feeling for the local people as well. It is a pilgrimage to go up to these churches. And looking out across the valley, you can see it's quite a dry environment. There are fields. People get to sustain themselves from their fields around their homes. Very old style agriculture. But it seems to be, they seem to have quite a variety of food, and the food in Ethiopia was excellent. Really enjoyed it. So walking on along the plateau, we came to this rock. Again, you can see a narrow or a low-lying wall made from stones, and that's the separating the compound area from the church. So that's kind of into the Ethiopian Orthodox Church's ground. And the church is actually that rounded rock right in the middle. And sort of behind those bushes and trees at the bottom, there were some windows and doors with shutters, which when they were unlocked, we could peer inside and start to see these columns and arches that you see there on the right. Quite extraordinary. Bright colours, yellow and blue. Going inside, it just opens out into a space of arches, columns, domes. You really feel like you're inside a church, inside a cathedral. But of course, it's not built so much as carved from the solid rock. And the paintings, like I say, were very, in this particular church, the focus seemed to be on blue and yellow in colour, gospel scenes, and also scenes of saints, angels. There's some more paintings here. You can see the crucifixion, and a few other biblical images, and possibly some saint images on the left there. And then in most of these rock-hewn churches, there is a grave, or a few graves even, and that's what that opening is on the left. Sometimes they're sealed up, sometimes they're open, and you can see bones. And this is the graves of the priests who used to work in the churches. They're interned in the church when they die. And in the center, there's a prayer stick. Some of the services are very long in the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, and they have a prayer stick to lean on because they remain standing throughout the prayers, and drums for the worship. So going on to the next church, our guide caught sight of the church early on and pointed it out to us. He said that rock in the middle, the one that sticks right up into the sky, that's the church. That's where we're headed. And so these images are all taken on the way down, so they're kind of in reverse. But on the left, the path going up to the church starts with quite a rugged road. The church we're headed for, again, is that massive in behind us. And then center, the path sort of narrows and becomes about 2 meters and then 1 meter wide and running along a cliff as usual, terrifying, drop to one side. And then just to make things worse with this one, the path suddenly stopped and there was about a 30-meter climb vertically up a rock face with a cliff drop just below us before we got back onto the path again. There were footholds and handholds cut into the rock, and we had these Tigrayan scouts with us to guide us through. And so we made the climb. Really like it, I must admit. I was very nervous. And then coming out from there, you follow the path for a while, and then you get to a point where it's a ridge path. So the cliff just drops away on both sides. And you can see the priest is just sort of negotiating that at the bottom right of this picture. And this is a picture I borrowed from the internet. I found this one because it's taken by a drone. So the drone's sort of flying away from the church. And you can see there's a very rugged cliff path, maybe a meter wide up to the doorway. It passes by an area that's filled in with rocks. So again, that's probably either earthquake damage or war damage. There's a grave down the bottom right. So let's just zoom out and see exactly what that path looks like. So can you see that the doorway sort of in the middle of the picture there, and the path? And there's over 100-meter drop from that path, just straight down. So we work our way across that path, sticking very closely to the cliff, and we enter through that doorway. So you can see there's Goosh on the left, our guide. Doesn't seem to be bothered by heights at all, quite happy to peer over the edge. And inside this doorway is kind of like an anteroom, and then we get into the true door that goes into the church. So this sort of portal just in the rock face, priest unlocks the door, and we go inside. And let our eyes accustomed to the darkness inside. We see there's carpets on the floor. We start to pick out paintings around us on the walls, on the ceilings. Again, similar kind of setup. It's kind of a cube shape, the main dome, and then rooms off to the sides. It's kind of a relief to get in, to the church after the climb, which was quite frankly terrifying, walking along the edge of cliffs, climbing vertical faces with cliff drops underneath. And so it's such a peaceful sensation once you get inside. You no longer feel the atmosphere outside, the heat of the sun, the breeze that's constantly blowing and rustling the leaves and the dust, and it's just so peaceful to come inside. It's cool. There's these beautiful images. You can just rest. So we have the Madonna image there. So this is Mary, Jesus. Reminded me of Axum. Reminded me of the church where I'd seen the Black Madonna. And again, I started thinking about the Ark of Zion. And really, what does the Ark of Zion have? It contains the word of the living God, and we kind of see that coming through in these churches as well. Kind of the word of the living God is captured on the walls. There's the saints there. We have the representation of the gospel with Mary. We have the image of the saints, the cloud of witnesses to testify to the truth of the ancient wisdom of the living God. The message brought by the priests in the ark, sort of confirmed by Philip when he baptized the Ethiopian eunuch in Acts, the early church missionaries in the 4th century that came into Ethiopia, and the life of the saints. And here we see the image of the saints on the dome. And then this very church, which is a witness to that word, testimony to the living God that is still present in Ethiopia. So we're surrounded by beauty, beautiful patterns. It's like ascending to a heavenly place. You come through that rough ascent and you reach this church. It's like coming up, ascending to heaven. But, reluctantly, there comes a point where we have to admit that we've stayed long enough and we've got to face that climb back down again. So here we go, down, coming from heaven to earth. And it was more terrifying coming down because my policy of just focusing on the path in front of me doesn't really work on the way down, because the whole scene opens up in front of you on your way down. There's no hiding your eyes from it. So we get down to the bottom, and our Tigray scouts, our angels who guide us through those difficult paths, depart, and that was the end of our journey. So it was interesting as we looked around these churches to notice that they all had a box, a treasure box, like a tabot, like an ark. And it was in these treasure boxes, some of them new, some of them old. This is the newer one, where they kept their silver crosses, crowns, and other silver items, but also the books, the handwritten books on parchment, all written in Ge'ez, the church language from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church. And they're beautifully illustrated, these books. So I read a comment about the Ark of Zion and from the Ethiopian Orthodox Church patriarch, and he was, when he was questioned about the Ark, and he said that the Ark is not important. What is important is what it contains. That's what's truly special. And I think that's something I've learned on this trip. Really is that word is such important. The message of the living God, transmitted to Ethiopia, kept safe over thousands of years, and still to this day being transmitted to those amazing rock-hewn churches.